Hello everyone, today I am back with the Subasharu build. In this video, I'm going to be pretty much finishing up the body by adding some more details such as mirrors, lights, interior, body lines, and some other custom accessories. For those of you who aren't familiar with this vehicle, this is a 2007 Subaru Impreza WRC Rallycross style car based on a custom all-wheel drive shaft-driven 3D printed chassis. I've already made several videos showing the progression of this build, which I have included a link to the playlist below in the description. Since the last video, I've done quite a bit of driving with this vehicle, and after a little bit of tweaking, the performance is at a level that I'm satisfied with. Unfortunately, the body is now showing a few battle scars around where the inner fenders are mounted to the body. You can see some spots where the inner fender has separated and taken the paint with it. This is a problem I've experienced on some other bodies as well, especially on thin bodies like this, and is one of the big downsides of mounting inner fenders this way. I am currently experimenting with some different techniques to help eliminate this problem, so hopefully I can avoid this issue on future builds. But with all that said, let's continue with this project. I designed and printed a number of parts for this vehicle, including this roll cage. I printed this out using a relatively thick layer height, which gives this roll cage a rough and unrealistic appearance. To combat this, I used a process that I've shown before, which helps to smooth the surface of an FDM 3D printed part. I made a video where I go into more detail on this process, so I'll be sure to include a link to that video below in the description. I started by filing down the part's rough surfaces, mostly focusing on corners and hard-to-reach places. Then I used a rotary tool with a sanding drum to further smooth out the layers. Once finished with the rotary tool, I sanded the entire surface with 320 grit sandpaper. With the sanding complete and the dust wiped off the part, I used Milliput epoxy putty to fill any large imperfections or holes, and I use it to help smooth out the transition between the 3D printed layers. Milliput is very easy to use. You simply mix equal parts of each stick until the color is uniform. After doing that, I thin the putty with some water and spread it over the part's surface. After allowing the Milliput to fully cure overnight, I once again filed and then sanded the surface of the part. It may not look pretty, but the part is now much smoother and ready for a resin coating, which will further smooth this part and provide a great surface to apply paint. I'll be showing this process later on in the video. Although there isn't room for a full interior due to this chassis design, I can still fit a partial interior to help give this car a more scale appearance. Starting with the dash, I printed this out using a thin layer height, so this part won't require as much post-print finishing. Just a bit of sanding and detail filing was all that was necessary to prepare this part for the surface smoothing resin coating. Before going any further with finishing the part, I first wanted to work out a way to mount the dash to the chassis. The dash sits a bit too low when mounted directly on top of the chassis' upper support, so I used some styrene to give the dash some additional lift. For convenience, I chose to mount the dash to the chassis using magnets for easy removal and easy access to the battery and electronics. I really like the added realism this dashboard provides. Once I was satisfied with the height and position of the dash, I marked the magnets' position and glued them to the chassis' upper support piece. Once again, due to the layout of this chassis, I won't be able to fit full seats into the interior, but I can fit these upper half seats, which I will mount to the chassis support. These were printed with a thin layer height and look good without any post-print finishing. All I did was just sand them down a bit with some 320 grit sandpaper. After sanding, I started test fitting the seats so I would know how I wanted to mount them. I found that they looked best when sitting on top of the styrene placed on top of the chassis' upper support as shown. After figuring out the height and placement, I traced out the seats and marked where I wanted to cut the styrene. After some rough cuts with a utility knife and side cutters, I sanded away the rest with a rotary tool and sanding drum. After I got them out looking how I wanted it, I then marked the location for the holes and drilled them out. Painting the seats was straightforward. I started with primer, which revealed a few spots that required additional sanding. I then applied another coat of primer and layered on some top coat thick enough to cover any visible print layers, and hand painted a few details. I also painted them out black so it wouldn't stand out. I lightly sanded the mating surfaces of both pieces and superglued them together. With the glue dry, I applied some tape and positioned the seats so they were in the correct spot. Once satisfied with their location, I marked the holes, removed the upper support, drilled the holes, mounted the seats, and reinstalled the upper support. For seatbelts, I just used some black duct tape, which I cut into strips and glued to each seat. I wanted to install a light kit onto this vehicle, so I decided to use this cheap kit I bought on eBay a while back. Lights can really make a car stand out and add to the coolness factor of the vehicle. Plus, these kits are usually really simple to install, but unfortunately this particular one ended up being a bit of a pain. I was initially impressed with the included instructions, which seemed clear and well illustrated, but but I quickly realized that none of the sockets on the board correlated with the action described on the instruction sheet. To make things even more confusing, some of the sockets seemed to be malfunctioning and at least 2 of them appeared to be dead. So I ended up doing a lot of my own wiring to get this thing to work how I wanted it to. Additionally, I needed to add 2 red 5mm LEDs to the brake light circuit. Thankfully, it didn't take that much work to get everything wired how I wanted it to. I ended up moving the receiver to the upper support and mounted the light control box where the receiver used to sit. I also organized the wires so that they were out of the way. I printed out the spoiler using a relatively thick layer height, making some of the parts of this piece not very smooth and therefore will require sanding and a resin coating to flatten the surface. I'm not always a huge fan of large spoilers like this one, but I think it looks alright on this car. Just like you saw with other parts I've worked on, I start by filing down the rough sections and then sand the entire surface. I also used a rotary tool to sand down the bottom center so that the spoiler will fit more snug to the trunk of the car. It's still pretty rough as shown, but after the resin coating, this part will be much smoother and ready for paint. With all the parts that I want smoothed sanded, I'm ready to apply XTC 3D to all the parts surfaces. XTC 3D is a brush-on coating that helps smooth the surface of 3D printed parts. It's very easy to mix and apply to the part surface, although do keep in mind that you may lose some fine detail on your part, especially if your part requires multiple coats. Overall, the process of applying the resin to the part is very easy. I just spread a little on using a small piece of foam and make sure that there aren't any thick spots. I ended up applying 2 coats to all the parts except the rear diffuser. Here's a look at the spoiler after 2 coats of XTC 3D. It still needs a bit of work before painting, but the coating really helped out and it's very easy to sand smooth. After some sanding, I applied a few coats of primer, which helped me to identify spots that needed further sanding and filling. I used a bit of Testor's contour putty to fill any low spots. I used the same process for the roll cage, first filing away any large imperfections such as spots where the resin coating was applied a bit too thick, then I sanded the entire part surface and applied primer. After that, I removed any remaining imperfections with a bit more sanding. Since the roll cage will be mounted inside the body and therefore won't be as visible, I'm not as concerned about smaller imperfections. The dash still had some noticeable rough spots on the surface, but I decided to just let them go since once again this part will be mounted inside the body, so imperfections will be less noticeable. The rear diffuser, however, looked great after just one coat of XTC 3D and a little sanding. Once painted, I glued the diffuser in place using some super glue. Before mounting the roll cage, I first marked its position, applied some shoe goo, and then placed it inside. To give the exterior of the body a more scale look, I used ABC Hobby bodyline tape. I carefully applied the tape along all the body's panel gaps. I printed out a number of higher detail parts using an SLA 3D printer. These parts come out looking smooth and highly detailed, so they don't really require much post-print finishing. I started with the steering wheel. All I did was do a little sanding around where the support structure was attached to the part, and then I hand painted it. After painting the dash, I added a few matte black accents with a brush and also glued the steering wheel to the column. I painted the magnetic dash mount black and taped the dash on top of it. After figuring out the exact position I wanted the dash to be located, I marked it and then glued the dash to the mount. I decided to design a very large intercooler that I could place behind the grille. I needed it to be large so it would block most of the chassis that's visible behind the grille. I printed this out using a short layer height, so this intercooler didn't require much sanding. I started painting by spraying it with some silver paint, and then I masked off the center section of the intercooler and applied some black paint with a brush. Before the paint had a chance to dry, I wiped off all the paint that was on top, which only left the paint in the lower sections of the intercooler. Painting it this way is a lot faster and easier than meticulously painting each lower section. After the intercooler was painted, I secured it to the front of the vehicle using a custom mount and some super glue. After spraying the muffler with chrome silver paint, I attached it to the mount and glued the mount to the body. I also removed a small section out of the rear bumper before gluing the muffler in place. I thought it would look cool to add some mud flaps to the car. I first made a template from paper and then cut some duct tape to match that shape, and then glued the mud flaps to the inner fenders. I had a rear view mirror sitting around, so I thought I'd use it on this build. I also had these side view mirrors that I glued to each of the body's A-pillars. I decided to try something a little different for the lights. Instead of painting them chrome, I painted them black and hand painted some chrome silver around where the LEDs will be placed. After painting, I simply inserted all the LEDs into their holes, tested the lights one final time, and then used a bit of shoe goo to secure them in place. I did have to rearrange the wires a bit so I would have enough reach to be able to remove the body. After the glue dried, I placed the light assemblies into the body. I used tape to hold them in place for now, since I'm going to be doing some extensive work on the chassis, and I may lengthen some of the LED wires. So for now, I don't want to have the lights permanently glued to the body. Personally, I like the look of the black light housings. Unfortunately, the camera doesn't quite do them justice. As you can see, the brake lights are functional. And finally, I installed these canards onto the front bumper using a little bit of super glue. Here's how the Subasharu looks as of right now. I ran out of paint while painting the rear spoiler, so that is why I don't have it on right now. I didn't want to wait any longer to upload this video, so I figured I'd just conclude this with the car as is, and I'll be sure to upload some pictures to Instagram of how the car looks with the spoiler on, once I'm finished painting it. With that said though, I do like how the car looks without a spoiler as well. I had a lot of fun designing and assembling all the parts and accessories for this car. As you might recall, initially I didn't intend to do a whole lot to this vehicle as far as scale details go, but I ended up getting a bit carried away and ended up doing quite a bit as you've just seen. I wasn't overly concerned about making things perfect or extremely accurate, I just had a bit of fun designing some parts and seeing how they would look when mounted to the body. And right now, I think the body looks pretty cool. The only additional things I think I might add to the body are license plates and maybe a bit of 1.5mm tape to outline the headlight and taillights. I am going to be doing quite a bit of work on the chassis. After some abusive driving, the upper shock mounts are showing some serious fatigue. I definitely need to design some stronger components there. I'm also going to use that opportunity to fit some larger shocks and longer control arms to increase the width of the chassis and give the vehicle less of a scared turtle look, with the wheels currently being too far inside the fenders in my opinion. I think I'm also going to add some brake rotors and calipers to add a bit to the scale look. I've gotten a lot of requests to release this chassis publicly, which I may do at some point in the future. But as I've mentioned before, this is an older design and I'd want to make some design revisions to it before doing a public release, and right now my priority is getting the 3D printable crawler designs completed and released. So that is all for this video. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, I'd appreciate it if you click that like button and subscribe for more content like this. I'm still not sure when I'll be able to return to a more regular upload schedule, but hopefully it will be sometime soon. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to leave it in the comment section below, and be sure to follow me at the social media links in the description for additional content and more frequent project updates. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.